Tom Hacker from WSP. I'm a transport planner, and I also work with Bus Rapid Transit UK, and I've done some work with Landor over the years as well. So thank you to Landor for asking me to help step in and chair this session. I did just want to start by saying I've been, listening in the background like most people all day, and just really impressed by people's attitude towards using platforms we've never used before. There are some things we just can't really work around, like internet dropping out and software problems, and just taking a step back for a minute. None of us had done any of this a little over 12 months ago, and I think that we're doing really well. And this type of platform, there's a lot of fantastic benefits to it, and I think in years to come we'll start to see a mixture of online and in-person events. So thanks to everybody for bearing with us. And obviously there's been some changes along the way. Speaking of changes along the way, I believe we are still waiting for the Member of Parliament for Bexhill and Battle, who will be joining us shortly to speak. And in the meantime, what we've decided to do is slight switch around is Paul White from CPT is going to come on, and he's going to deliver his 10-minute presentation around spending £500 million, which is a lot of money to spend. Everybody likes the idea of it, but it's not straightforward, as I'm sure you're about to explain, Paul.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, you're right. I'm just going to try and set up my presentation. Okay, that's hopefully it. Yes, so yeah, my name's Paul White. I'm the director for CPT Scotland, which is the Confederation of Passenger Transport, the trade association for the bus and coach sectors. And I'm presenting today on the Bus Partnership Fund, 500 million for bus priority infrastructure over the next 5 years. So I'm not talking about a scheme where I can use it as a case study and tell you what we have done. I'm here to talk about what we're hopefully going to do. So the scheme was originally launched in August 2019, but we had to relaunch it last year in November due to COVID-19 having forced both government and operators to focus on more immediate matters. However, I'm delighted that government's refocused on the scheme and reiterated the need for this type of large-scale investment in bus infrastructure, which fits in nicely with the recent government strategies and targets around transport, air quality and decarbonisation. So what I'm going to do hopefully today is give you a quick overview of the bus operation in Scotland and some of the policy context that surrounds the Bus Partnership Fund, touch on the aims of the scheme, and finally some of the views of the bus sector. And I'm going to start by giving some of the Scottish perspective. So back in 2017, we commissioned KPMG to look at bus patronage decline in Scotland. And they pointed out the several contributing factors to that, 3/4 of which I have to say are not within the control of bus operators. And a couple really stick out, those being car ownership and bus journey time, which is essentially the impact of congestion. The industry lost 6 million passenger journeys to congestion over a 5-year period. One of our conclusions from this work was the need for to free buses from that congestion by that kind of large-scale investment in bus priority measures. KPMG estimated that for every £1 invested in local bus services, it could generate up to £8 in wider social, economic and environmental benefits. And I believe DFT measures that figure at around £4.20 per £1 investment. Either way, that seems good value. So since then, the case for bus investment has only been amplified by the government's approach to air quality and climate emissions. Yes, so we have a global climate change, global climate emergency declared by the First Minister, and some really testing targets, 75% by 2030 and then net zero by 2045. And transport's very much in the spotlight when it comes to this. And in terms of road transport, I think about 60% of those transport emissions are due to car and 5% roughly from bus and coach. And that has spawned a second national transport strategy, which was launched in February 2020, just before COVID. Although I think that the vision and priorities remain valid in the pandemic context, but probably more challenging to deliver. And I believe bus can be viewed as an enabler to each of those 4 core objectives: reducing inequalities, climate action, economic growth, improving health and well-being. So we have a set of challenging targets for carbon reduction and a transport strategy that has a focus on sustainable active transport with objectives that align with growing bus patronage. And the final part of that picture is probably for this slide here, which is one oft used by Scottish Government, which shows that they don't believe it's just about electrifying cars as a solution. They see their preferred vision of the future being increased walking, increased cycling, increased bus use. And yes, electrifying cars is part of it, but fewer car journeys overall is also part of it. So hopefully that answers part of the why question. Why allocate 500 million for bus infrastructure improvements? Because government recognises that improving bus running times and making bus more attractive and generating modal shift is in line with its aims and objectives across various policy sectors, including transport, health, the environment, economy and equality. Okay, so now onto the fund itself. To describe the fund, I'll probably start with the name. Why is it called the Bus Partnership Fund and not the Bus Infrastructure Fund? And the reason for that is it's essentially linked to the Transport Scotland Act of 2019. Now, within the provisions of that Act, they revised the statutory partnership model for local authorities and transport operators, replacing the statutory quality partnership or SQP model with bus service improvement partnerships, BSIPs. The BSIP model that's been introduced lessens the requirement for local authorities to match operator investment in fleet or services with investment in infrastructure improvements, which is something that we thought was often behind the lack of local authority enthusiasm in adopting the SQP model. BSIPs allow local authority input to be based more around softer, less expensive measures, which would at first glance seem to imbalance the partnership, placing most of the cost on the operator. And I think the Bus Partnership Fund is viewed as part of the solution to that. The fund is for priority infrastructure to address the impacts of congestion and is awarded to local authorities as the accountable authorities for local roads. However, applications must be from partnerships, so local authorities and bus operators working towards bus service improvement partnership status. So if we accept that better bus services are created when operators and public sector are working closely together, then the Bus Partnership Fund is the catalyst for creating those partnerships. When we look at the design principles for the scheme, they kind of outline what's expected from bids. They're looking for a holistic look at sustainable and active travel. So we have to consider what's happening with the active travel and infrastructure improvements as well, and a focus on reducing congestion and making bus services more reliable, alignment with local transport strategies, and a demonstrable commitment to partnership working and value for money. And I should add to this that the government is looking for large-scale, ambitious bids, or as our Cabinet Secretary for Transport put it recently, no wee footery bids. Okay, so what has the operator response to this been? I think, first of all, when we got news of this 500 million, our first response was, wow. We've pushed for investment in bus infrastructure, and I believe we've made a strong case demonstrating the impact of congestion in the network and therefore patronage and emissions, but it was still a shock to see $500 million allocated to bus in this manner. It's a large sum. And secondly, dawning realisation that we now have a job in our hands to make sure this money is spent efficiently and effectively. And that's challenging now with many more immediate challenges around service operation through COVID. But we need to make the time and hope our local authority partners do likewise to make this scheme a success. So bandwidth is an issue, and part of it will also depend on political will. Spaces for People is a scheme for active travel infrastructure that really did amazingly well through the first lockdown in road space reallocation for active travel. And there was a good degree of political backing for that. However, there has been a bit of a pushback from the car lobby and others in the months since, giving elected officials quite a hard time for that road space allocation. So we have to hope that there's still the political will for this kind of road space allocation when it comes to bus. Okay, and in conclusion, there is a demonstrable need to free bus from congestion, and it aligns with government's targets and vision. And I have to praise the government for allocating this funding. However, I know that if we don't maximise the impact from this 500 million, then there's little scope for further support at this scale. So it is really much use it or lose it. From our discussions so far, local authority transport officers seem to be bought into this process, but we do know we need to win the hearts and minds of elected officials if this is going to succeed. So partnership is very much the key. I know from speaking to our operator members that one thing that COVID has shown is that for some services there's been a 15% reduction in journey times as the roads have been clear, and there has been less congestion, and we need to lock in that benefit and use the Bus Partnership Fund to do so. The first round of bids closes in April 16, so I look forward to being invited back to a future event in a couple of years' time so I can present more on how we've made this scheme a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. And I think what we'll do is we'll move on to, we'll come back to some questions at the end. But what we're going to do is move through the presentations, if that's okay with you, Paul. So I'll hand over to Angela Hosford. Been working for a number of years now on the Sprint programme, one of the UK's leading bus rapid transit schemes for Transport for West Midlands. So, yep, I'll hand over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Tom. Can you see my screen?
I can, and I can hear you as well.
Perfect. That's really good news. Good start. Yeah, I always find Friday afternoons on a bank.
Wait a second, I've lost your. I could see.
No, you can't. We can't see your screen, I'm afraid, Angela.
That was your screen, Justin.
No, we can't. That was my screen. We can't see yours, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay, right. Let me try again. Okay, so if I go this way and then I put this up, does that help?
Give it a second. There may be a delay. We're not seeing anything, I'm afraid. I do have a copy of your slides here, so shall I run through them for you?
Okay.
Just say next slide, please.
It's quite a quick paste slide deck,
just go next, and then we'll be fine.
Okay, perfect. All right. Sorry about that.
No right here.
I can see what you're looking at. That's great. All right, fantastic. Okay, so yes, thank you, everybody. Tom, you're absolutely right. Started on this in 2015 when we had a couple of routes at OBC level in the pipeline, and we're sort of moving forward quite a pace now. So I want to kind of cover 4 areas if I can, please. So reminder of the network and what we're doing in the West Midlands. I've got quite a few visuals because I feel like on a Friday afternoon of half term, we just need to look at some pictures and get an impression. A few areas of interest that I know that the conference is particularly interested in with regards to the EP and vehicles and zero emission. And then if I can, at the end, I'd like to throw a video in there which kind of loops back around to where we started. So next, please. Okay, so the network. So as I mentioned, 2015, we had 2 routes. Now we have a network of 7 that are sat firmly in our regional transport strategy, Movement for Growth. Really, this is about connecting the region, providing economic and regeneration opportunities for the region, really trying to invest in our public transport network where potentially we've had growing congestion, growing air quality issues, and we've really possibly underinvested over time for various reasons. But the formation of the combined authority and a mayor at the moment that is very pro public transport and supporting schemes that provide that green solution is really sort of behind us and helping us progress these. The 2 purple routes that you can see there are the ones that we are significantly advanced on. So effectively we've got full funding for those secured. We're starting construction on one this month, and the other one is shortly to follow. So exciting times. Our target date to get the infrastructure delivered is effectively March 22. You may be aware that the Commonwealth Games is coming to the West Midlands next year. So we're really driven to get the infrastructure in place as a minimum, if not full service operation by then, so that we can take advantage and help with the transport network during the games and beyond. Next, please. Oh, next. Okay, so this is just a bit more detail on the specific of the routes that we're fully funded on and moving into construction. I won't go through the details because I know that these slides will probably be shared afterwards, but there's some quite useful details there with regards to the business case benefits and some of our targets. What was really important for us in developing these schemes, and going back to 2018 when we had we were moving to outline business case, was for us to do detailed consultation and commit ourselves to ongoing engagement with the people that will be affected. So our principle very much is around road space reallocation, priority at points of congestion, signal priority through signal junctions, and it is going to affect some of those people that reside on these routes to an extent. So it's always been important to us that we consult and that we maintain to engage. And there's just an example there of some of the, passenger public friendly sort of diagrams that take the sort of techie design into something that is user friendly, and individuals could point to their house and go, okay, how's this going to affect me? And we felt that was really important. Off the back of that, we kind of did a review. We got majority support across the piece, and those statistics are there for you to see. There's actually a video at the bottom that you can watch in your own leisure, which effectively shows how we then adapted to the feedback consultation and took things further to sort of try and support and get the support we needed to get the approvals in place. Next, please. Okay, so again, just communication, ongoing engagement, really committed to that. We've got a video, I'm hoping I can show you that at the end, an animation about the benefits. And it really is, if we're going to win the hearts and minds, we need to keep promoting the benefits and why this is the right thing for the region, why it's best for the environment, why it's good for the economy, why it's good for connectivity. And those are the kind of key areas for us. Communication, obviously in COVID, has been quite challenging. We've got websites that we keep updated. We have newsletters. We've done a lot more letter drops. We use our customer relations team to sort of be on call for any queries that the public might have, and we can walk them through the detail without actually having the exhibition boards out and about in the public at the moment, and certainly through 2020 that would have been very difficult. So as we've moved into this new space of COVID, then we've had to adjust and adopt how we approach our communications. Certainly engagement, we follow the DfT's guidance on the ability to sort of meet that statutory requirement. And again, we kind of overdid the communication, I think, because of COVID, but better to over communicate than under communicate, and make sure that we've got all those channels covered so that people understand and have opportunity to respond. And similarly, we did a shelter consultation, and hopefully I can sort of flick through that a little bit in a little while. Next, please. Okay, so this is a very detailed slide, and I don't expect you to be able to read it, but I think what this is really trying to say is, this has been the heavy work of 2020 in many ways. We got into ECI, we used the Midland Highway Alliance framework, and appointed Morgan Sindall to work with us on an ECI basis as we approach the full business case. And as we got there, Brexit and various other things, we found that actually the costs that we'd anticipated were greater than we thought. And as we were going through the governance process, it was quite apparent that from the Combined Authority that the extra funding that we would require to deliver this in its entirety was not going to be there in the immediate term, which was basically February 2020. So we quickly had to sort of adjust that. So we got our first target cost from the ECI contractor. We had to adjust our approach. We agreed on a phasing strategy for the scheme. So what we won't have now is a big bang, but we have a full business case that's completely signed off, and a commitment that as funding becomes available, that we will continue to develop and build and build on what we've already done. But we've now got a two-phase strategy. So we had possibly, I'm trying to read those dates now, I think we had basically, we decided that in December. We got the full business case approved in February. We then got our revised target price in August, having gone through the engagement and the partnership process of looking at the scope and what we were going to put into one phase or another, and found that we still had some challenges around that. So we've actually done a flip and changed our contracting model. So for the A45, we've proceeded, and we're now, as of this month, in construction with Morgan Sindall. And we're very, very shortly to let the packages, we split the A34 into sections. We've gone out to the SMEs, who actually in the background have been crying for the work because they've missed out on a lot of the major schemes that otherwise would have been coming forward in a COVID environment. They've been put on hold. So there's an opportunity, and we've really tried to harness that and support the local businesses and the local contractors. Gives us a different challenge in terms of management, but we're confident that we can deliver that. And you know, we've had a really positive response on the first 2 packages that have gone out. So like I said, we're looking to award B and C next week, and we've got the TM contractor teed up now too. So it's been something that we've had to rethink and, you know, be agile with the change in the market, with the change in the cost of materials and the labour, but also just listening to the market as well about where we're best to go. And it's been quite interesting and a good year last year to sort of navigate through that. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that experience. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so these are quite fast slides. I just want to show you. So whilst we were doing that negotiation around the main contract, we were doing a lot of the preliminary works. So the moment we got our FBC approved on the 14th of February 2020, we started with the utilities. And here's the advantage of COVID. And I know there are many disadvantages, but there's nobody on the road. So in terms of getting the road space to be able to make a real dent and get a lot of the stats moved that we would need to for the main civil works, we managed to make some really good headway. Next, please. And here's a good example of just the extent of, we covered 9 miles of utility diversions in 10 months. It's been phenomenal, but it's been, you know, we've managed to clear all this out. Next, please. Again, just some examples, and just gives you a feel and an impression of the scale of the works that we've had to sort of work through. Next, please. And, you know, I think, is this the summary slide? Just next, please. Next, please. Okay, perfect. So we managed to get all the utility works out of the way. We managed to do it on time, on budget, and we had no strikes and no accidents. So I think that was a really, really good result, and credit to our utility team that worked really hard on that, and the management of it, which was phenomenal, actually. And now we're in construction, so we managed to get all of the utilities out of the way. We managed to get our contracts arranged on the A45. These photos were actually taken last weekend. So we are effectively, we've got the traffic management out, we're taking a lane out on the A45. We're using the tech to kind of try and move some of the groundworks without affecting any of the remaining utilities that are underway. So really good progress, very exciting to see something from concept moving to build phase. You know, it's not without its challenges. We've already had a Severn Trent burst water main that's effectively affected our ability to get some of this traffic management on. But I think that partnership working with our local authority partners is key in making sure that we can navigate our way through some of those challenges. And it's really good to see things happening on the ground. Next, please. Okay, so a few of the things that I know that the sort of BRTuk are interested in, and I just wanted to sort of pick up on a few of those things. Clearly, 20 minutes isn't a lot of time, so you know, we could probably fill a day for you at the moment. But I've got some of my colleagues on the call as well on the meeting, so who might be able to help answer any questions if there are any specific to some of these items. But I'll just cover briefly shelters, a little bit about enhanced partnerships and what that means for us, and some of the challenges that we've had around that. Against the model of construction we're delivering against, and then also zero emissions.
Angela,
it is 10 minutes, including.
Oh, is it 10 minutes?
Video.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I thought it was 20. Okay, so there's plenty here for you to digest. There's this is the prototyping model that we use to sort of look at the shelter and the infrastructure. If you just go to the next slide, you can just get a flavour for what that looks like. Okay, so this is effectively out on the ground now, tested. We got public feedback, and this is what will be rolled out across the network. If you keep going, please, very, very quickly, I'll try and just cover off. Yeah, next one, keep going. There's an illustrative, next slide. I think this is basically, you know, right, with regards to the EP, it's been very challenging for us to be able to explain to our politicians how all this fits together. Certainly the enhanced partnership is key for us, and the message for us has been it gives us more control over our network than we've ever had before. And that's been something that we've had to really champion through. And then just very briefly, so I mentioned about this phased approach, zero emissions. So we're going to be using a mixture of hydrogen buses, and we're very keen to still roll out the tram-style articulated vehicles with electric power, and that's been the shift, I think, since probably we last spoke. We were talking about better than Euro 6 diesel hybrids, and now we're talking about, you know, electric vehicles. So with that, if you go to the next slide, please. Very last slide. What might be interesting to the audience is the fact that we are effectively putting together a framework at the moment for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which would, in theory, once we've got it in place, be available for other authorities to utilise as well. So I'm clearly out of time. Sorry, I thought I had 20 minutes, so I've totally overrun that. The video will have to go in the comments, and hopefully you get a chance to view it at your leisure. I
was just going to suggest that, Angela, so if we could...
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Sorry.
YouTube link. I don't apologise. It's fine. You're here. So what we're going to do is come back to questions
sure.
at the end. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Hugh Merriman, who's the MP for Brexit and Battle in East Sussex, and he's the chair of the Transport Select Committee. Hi, Hugh.
Tom, I'm not the MP for Brexit. I'm the MP for Bexhill.
I said Bexhill, didn't I?
You said Brexit.
Sorry. It's been a long day in my spare bedroom. Apologies for that, but at least it made you chuckle. We're off to the right start.
No, that's great. I think a lot of my constituents think I am responsible for that, despite voting against it. But there we are. Well, thank you ever so much. I know I've got 5 to 10 minutes. So I will make sure I stick to my timing. I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone for the invitation to be able to speak. It's such a shame not to be able to come and speak and all be together. There's so much that can be learned, but I hope that it's been a successful session for everyone so far. So I'm, by way of introduction, I'm the chairman of the Transport Select Committee. I was elected by the MPs across party. So every MP gets a vote on select committee chairs back at the beginning of last year. And then, of course, the pandemic hit us all. So since then, we've very much ripped up our agenda, and we've very much been looking at how the pandemic is impacting the transport sector and what government and organisations can do to rebuild better. So the title of this conference is very apt. I hope you don't mind if I make a shameless plug for the inquiry that we're currently through. Where it's a 7-part inquiry, so it's a really big one for us, and it will be on, or it is on reforming public transport after the pandemic. So we want to really look and see what's happened to all of the transport sectors, what's likely to occur, and what government and the public sector needs to do to support the transport sectors to recover, and perhaps where some things that have been positive in this miserable last year can be built upon. So that we do change things for the better. And obviously the bus sector is a really important sector for us to look at. So we've just had a session, it was actually the very first one, on transport specifics, and it was on buses, and that's the importance we place on the bus as the mode of transport. And we found a number of things, and perhaps I'll just sort of share these with you. I thought it was really interesting. The first session we had was a general session, and we discussed with some big employers what they thought the landscape was likely to be with regard to their workforce working from home and how they thought things would look. And it's quite interesting chatting to them, because they felt that, you know, with one particular huge company, primarily based in London, where a lot of their workforce were sort of quite in the younger cohort, lived in the sort of zone 2, 3 in London, and they felt that those people would want to come back to the office because not least, you know, their home conditions meant there are a number of people sharing a flat, and it just wasn't conducive to good working operation, and found that the workforce were getting sort of restless being at home. So they felt those would go back, but they felt that more mature years, where perhaps they're working further from home, would really grasp the opportunity and wouldn't want to come back to the office. So, you know, that was actually quite an eye-opener. They also felt that their workforce, particularly those in the creative industries, if they were just at home all day speaking into their computer, then some of their creative initiative has been lost. So they really felt that the commute and the travel, as we all stare out the windows and start thinking, would likely come back for some of the creative sides, so that they are actually in that thinking space away from just one room. So it was really interesting getting their input. What we then did was look outside of the UK and try to get some reflections from those who run public transport systems in Singapore, Sweden and France, and what they found. One of the things I thought was really interesting from Singapore was that they never told the general public to avoid travelling on public transport, and they felt that if they'd done so, then it would be very hard to get people back if you've previously told them it wasn't safe. And I think that's a very key lesson that we're going to have to, we can't correct what occurred, but we're going to have to double up our efforts to make sure that the public know that the public transport system is safe, it's clean, you are unlikely to catch COVID, and indeed with 90% of the mortality risk pretty much covered on the vaccination front now, that really should remove, we hope, COVID from such high levels of risk. And then we started moving into the sectors. So we're now looking at buses, and what we'll look next is active travel and rail, and then we'll return back to general points. So that's where we are at the moment. So I do hope you'll follow this. I just wanted to touch on some of the things that we really went into detail through the witnesses, some of whom are on this meeting, and they really gave us some really good expertise and some impacted some real concerns that they have that government really need to fix and manage better on. So as far as the impact is concerned, you'll all know this better than I do. I mean, the service supply level is actually still there on buses, which is superb. So I think at the moment, as a result of the tailored government support, we've got about 90% of pre-COVID levels in terms of bus operations that are still being used. And we did get to a good place in time after the first lockdown was lifted, when the bus journeys across the country have returned to about 60% of their pre-COVID levels. I think that was in September of 2020. The worrying sign that we have at the moment, when we were given an excellent graph by the CPT, was that the gap between demand and supply has never been greater during the almost year of sort of various lockdowns, and that's obviously a concern. And we obviously want to see the bus market get back once this lockdown is eased, to the point where, in a way, the challenge is, how do you get all the people onto the bus that want to get on and still socially distance? And that's obviously where we were back in autumn, when the bus companies were really struggling to see how they could fit everybody on. That's obviously not been the case for January. And obviously, in terms of, I've touched on safety. Now, I was really struck by a report that came out of France and Germany that only 1% of COVID-19 cases have been traced to public transport. But the frustration is the perception of the public, and this was found from a transport focus survey, has got a mindset that buses, trains and trams seem to be less safe than other public spaces, such as bars, shops and restaurants, when in fact you're more likely to get COVID from those settings than you are from public transport. So it's incredibly frustrating, in a way, that the message "do not travel on public transport" linked towards safety has almost now given the impression to the public that public transport is not safe, when the deep cleaning and the like that goes on makes it a safer setting, I would argue, than many other public spaces. But we also know, and we heard, and I for those that tuned in, I certainly gave my tribute at the end of my thanks, because those of you who work on the buses, work on the front line, now have you put yourselves at harm's risk. And we looked at a study from the Institute of Health Equity at University College London, which TfL had commissioned, and unfortunately it showed that the death from COVID for those on bus drivers aged 20 to 64 was 3.5 times higher than men of the same age in all occupations across England and Wales from March to May. Now, of course, London was the centre of the pandemic for a time. Many bus drivers had underlying health conditions, but that just demonstrates that so many have put themselves on the front line and have made a sacrifice for it. And I just want to pay my respect to those that have done so. We've looked at restoring public confidence, and obviously, you know, that's got to be key once we actually get through this January lockdown. We look forward to the Prime Minister this coming Monday announcing what restrictions are going to be eased from the 8th of March. And obviously, there's been a lot of calls, and I think we'll certainly join the Select Committee to this, to get the government at the right time to invest in a campaign to encourage people back onto public transport. And I think, you know, government's really got to work with the industry and indeed unions on a campaign to promote both the safety and the benefits of bus travel, and then perhaps also remind people what we were reminding them before, that travelling by bus is not just good to ease congestion, but good for those who want to ease net zero, ease our way through to the delivery of net zero in terms of our carbon footprint, but also actually a way to sort of work whilst you're on the move as well, which you can't do by car. So it is a big concern that the car usage has got pretty much back to, and did relatively quickly, back to pre-pandemic levels, but bus usage was just not as great, albeit it hadn't fallen off the cliff as much as trains had. I'll just touch again on home working and online shopping. I mean, it's staggering really if you consider that online shopping, I mean, obviously it's grown steadily over the last decade. It boomed after the first lockdown to account for about a third of total retail sales. That's up from 19% in 2019. So, you know, the issue is there's so many people use the bus for their shopping, and if they're not going to be shopping out, then they're not going to be taking the bus, and obviously that's a big concern. We'd already seen prior to the pandemic that bus patronage had gone down by about 10%, and pretty much in most, albeit not all, local authorities. And we also know that we expect from an employers survey that 47% of employers expect their staff's time to be split evenly between home and the office. And that was a CBI survey. It was the CBI that actually helped us get the big employers in the room with us. So, you know, if shopping is the most common reason why people take the bus, then we're almost going to have to find a way to grow a new market, more based on leisure, so that people perhaps are still encouraged to visit the centres, even if they're not going to be shopping in those centres. So, you know, how do we support the recovery? So obviously the government has, on average, given about £27 million per week to fund bus services outside London. It's also maintained the bus services operators grant despite the fuel usage having dropped. But, you know, the big key is to make sure that this £3 billion that's been committed by government to the bus over the course of this Parliament is spent on the bus services and the improvements that we all envisaged a year ago. And that money is not eaten into by the need to sort of unlock and restart. And I think we all have to keep a careful eye on that to make sure that the money isn't sort of taken away. We know the Treasury under big pressures to make sure they rein in public spending. I think that's going to be more of an issue perhaps on rail than perhaps it will be on bus, because I think the market will come back. Whereas arguably for rail, because it's so commuter based, it might be more of a struggle. But I think it's absolutely essential the government does that and also sticks to its commitment with regard to funding the number of green buses, if I call that as well. Last couple of minutes, I just want to focus on the national bus strategy. I have to say I'm really excited about this. It's already overdue. I'm afraid to say a lot of the documents coming out of the Department for Transport have been overdue. The delivering decarbonisation to transport was supposed to be out last year. At the end of it, it will now be spring. Also, the restart and recovery for aviation was due last autumn. We now hear it will be the end of this year. But I think the bus strategy looks like it's imminent. And I'm really, really keen to make sure that that strategy actually has some sort of content. Yes, it actually has a what the bus market for the future should look like, and a sort of clear, consistent vision of the future for bus travel. But I'd also like to see some changes that our Select Committee inquiry from a few years back, when I was a member then, and our report and recommendations made. And we called for a bus strategy. It was interesting at the time. The response we got back from the then government and then minister was very dismissive of bus strategy. And so I encouraged our then chair, Lillian Greenwood, to just, rather than publish with disappointment, to privately go back and say, why don't you have another go? Otherwise, we will publish this response. And in the meantime, there was a change in Prime Minister, and we got a Prime Minister who obviously has a great love of buses and is used to running them from his time as Mayor of London. And I thought it was fascinating then, because the response we got back was, actually, we've had a look at this, and we think a bus strategy is an excellent idea, and we fully endorse the Select Committee's recommendation for a bus strategy, and we'll be working on it. And of course, since then, they have. And certainly, without wishing to give any of the bus operators the fear here, we were struck as a committee how, when you look at rail, which at that point was largely paying for itself in terms of the customer paying for the train operation via its ticket, the government still told the trains when and where to stop. Whereas bus, on the other hand, despite the fact that there are billions of public subsidy in there, mostly from the bus support operation grant, but also some, albeit dwindling, from local authority funds, but still in billions. There's no real sort of direct imposition from the public sector as to where those bus services should operate and how they should be. So we saw examples in Sheffield where a GP surgery had moved, but the bus service hadn't moved with it. Now you think from a market perspective that that would occur, but clearly doesn't. We also saw examples where bus services had been withdrawn, and then of course once you've lost the patronage, it's too late for a successor to then step in and run the bus service. So we came up with some ideas where perhaps you could have a bus service as an asset of community value, a bit like pubs are. They have to keep going for 6 months before anything can occur with them. We also like the idea of having a bus, a commitment that bus services will go past certain community and public assets. But ultimately, we looked at the idea of the organisation, and it was clear to us that where you have the franchising incentive, you end up with really good partnerships. It'll be interesting if we ever see more franchises put in place where they were given powers to be utilised. They don't appear to be so far, but I know that Manchester is looking at this. But I always felt they were really good, perhaps should I say stick and carrot, to incentivise a really good, strong bus partnership. And I believe that does occur where franchising could be utilised. But why is it the case that you have to have a directly elected mayor, or you can be Cornwall, and you're allowed franchising, but other local authorities are not allowed that power? So we like the idea of franchising almost at the top of the hierarchy. Then you've got your partnership process. And then if that doesn't deliver a service, then what's wrong with a municipal service such as they have in Nottingham and Oxford, but where the government just prohibited any further? I believe that will be unwound. I do think the bus strategy will perhaps open that up a little more. If a local authority can build council houses because there aren't enough private houses being built, then why can't they do likewise in terms of creating a bus service where the private sector isn't able to operate? So I believe that would be a really good thing. And ultimately, I just want to make sure that the bus market is given more impetus and more enthusiasm from government than it has been over previous years. I'm afraid rail just seems to get most of the attention, whereas in fact we all know that the bus market accounts for more people using public transport than all the other public transport provisions put together. So we need to really make bus at the forefront of development. We need to make it greener. We need to really sort of make it more fashionable. And I believe that the bus service operators are doing that. And ultimately, I just feel there's a really bright future for it. But I think it's absolutely essential that the government doesn't tap into the £3 billion that have been ring-fenced for future of bus services. It does invest further in helping the bus operators and the market really advertise themselves as a really good way to get around. And ultimately, I think that the future can be bright for bus, but I think that will only occur with a really sound bus strategy. So right now, it's incredibly important that that gets delivered and is received with enthusiasm, and we build on it. So I've probably gone over my time. I apologise if so, but I'll perhaps shut up now so that we can take questions whenever they're appropriate. Thank you so much.
For that, and apologies again, but thanks so much for joining us. If it's okay with you, we've got 2 more short presentations, and then we're going to do a joint Q&A, and there might be an opportunity for different people to chip in. So are you able to hang around a little bit longer? Absolutely, and looking forward to it as well. All right, thanks very much. Okay, so we're going to move on to Pam Turton now from Portsmouth City Council. Are you still there, Pam?
I'm trying to share screen, so I hope you might be able to see that. Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. I can see the screen. I can't see you, but oh, there you are. Hi, Pam.
Hiya.
And you're going to be talking all
Okay.
things transformational rapid transit. Okay, so I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, many thanks. I'm Pam Turton. I'm the Assistant Director for Transport at Portsmouth City Council. And so this afternoon, I'd like to talk to you about South East Hampshire Rapid Transit, looking at what we're trying to deliver to address the challenges we're facing in Portsmouth and the wider city region, before moving on to highlight some lessons learned from the programme, which may be of interest as we look to build back better. So, South East Hampshire Rapid Transit, or CERT, as it's essentially become known, is centred on Portsmouth and the wider city region, which is a distinctive travel to work area on the south coast of England. Portsmouth itself is a densely populated majority island city, and it's surrounded by over 100 miles of coastline, 2 islands and a peninsula with limited bridge links. And this extended separation of the interdependent communities to the periphery of the city continues to negatively impact on connectivity, productivity and air quality. In particular, geography, many public transport journeys involve convoluted and extended routes and multiple interchanges. Often, in fact, these are at high cost both to the passenger and to the operator. And so even where direct public transport links exist, journeys can be slow, largely due to traffic, congestion, and importantly, unreliable. And so it's perhaps not surprising that the mode share for buses is low, with on average only around 51 journeys per person per year. And this was even before the pandemic hit. So we clearly needed to do something. Sorry, for some reason that's, oh, there we go. So we needed to do something to create the right environment for public transport to prosper. And to move towards that aim, South East Hampshire Rapid Transit was created. Our local bus transport operators, ourselves, fellow local authorities in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, in an ambition and a commitment to deliver a bus rapid transit network across the Portsmouth City region. So funded through £56 million investment from the DfT's Transforming Cities Fund and £45 million in match funding, over the next 3 years, we're going to deliver 23 coordinated bus priority schemes, which together with commitments from our bus operator partners, some of which Matt Gamble spoke very eloquently about earlier, will form a coherent bus rapid transit network, improving connectivity across the city region. So what's it going to deliver? Well, importantly, it's going to deliver quicker and more reliable bus journeys. Our initial modelling has shown that once this phase of the CERT programme is complete, journey times for passengers will be significantly improved, approaching the 20% journey time reduction, which has been shown in other areas as being key to winning customs from car users and delivering significant modal shift. There's going to be better access to employment, education and leisure facilities, linking up labour markets to new employment opportunities and boosting productivity of the city region. It's also going to help improve air quality, not least through this modal shift, which is probably in the region of around 3,100 person trips per day from car to bus. So through the investment that our bus operator partners are making, First and Stagecoach have committed to 20 new high-quality, low-emission Euro 6 buses for the network over the 3-year funding period. But what's most useful today would be to focus on the transferable elements of the CERT partnership and what could potentially be a strategy for building back better following the pandemic. So in the remaining time this afternoon, I'd like to talk through 3 key components: partnership, integration, and engagement. So as you'll all be aware, many of the challenges we face in improving mobility are not bound by administrative boundaries, and consequently, neither are the solutions. The ability to deliver those solutions comes from the collaborative working of a broad range of stakeholders. As the success of the CERT programme is fundamentally tied to the strength of the partnership and the commitment of each of those stakeholders to it. We are fantastically lucky in the Portsmouth City region to have developed a really close partnership between our local transport authorities, transport operators, and our consultant team, Atkins. The strength of the partnership and the belief in the product has certainly been tested. We were unsuccessful in the first round of bidding for TCF funding the same day as Liverpool crashed out of the Champions League, so forever a day of misery in my mind. But the important point is that the partnership endured. We regrouped, we refocused, and we rebid, and we're here now on the brink of the delivery of a £100 million programme. And I think the thing that made that possible is the fact that we've operated as a single team, aware and respectful of the contribution that each stakeholder makes to the process in achieving our overall aim. The fact is that the whole is far greater than the sum of its parts. We are, however, acutely aware that this is very much the beginning of the journey, if you'll excuse the pun, and we're very ambitious for the future. And so as we embark upon this journey of this phase of delivery, the partnership is actually shifting its focus to engage closely with planning authorities and our public health colleagues to integrate CERT into future developments and to identify opportunities for future bids. Looking at the integration of land use and transport planning, we need to break down the barriers between planning and transport authorities to ensure that sustainable access to development is a first thought rather than, and to create the right environment for developments to be delivered with sustainable connectivity built in. The map here shows the art of the possible, perhaps in terms of future phases of CERT and the way in which it could be used to link up with the new development sites across the city and to really create sustainable communities. In addition to this, there's also a need for supporting policy to maximise the effectiveness of the infrastructure delivered, to prevent the system being undermined by congestion and to support the overall mode shift to public transport. Within Portsmouth, for example, we are currently consulting on a new transport strategy and will shortly be launching a consultation on a new parking strategy, which will reduce the availability of parking and increase its cost in order to reduce overall demand. And so the last thing I would like to touch on is of understanding and responding to our current and future customers' needs, echoing the really good points made by Claire Walters earlier. This has been very much in my mind over the last few weeks. I attended a forum a couple of weeks ago where one participant responded, "I would bus." We cannot assume that others have the necessary knowledge, nor underestimate the degree to which it constitutes a barrier to travel. We need to understand what our residents want and what would make the transport system work for them. We need to understand different perspectives and different needs and make a system which truly works for all. For example, research last year from Imperial College demonstrated that there were significant differences in gender perceptions on the safety of public transport, with women feeling significantly less safe than men when on public transport. We as an industry need to hear and respond to those views. And that's why we've established a community panel for users of public transport to enable local people to shape CERT as the programme progresses. An impressive total of 840 people signed up to join our panel, a figure which has been supplemented by direct invites across the community to ensure that we have that diversity of views. Going forward, panel members will be invited to take part in surveys, focus groups and engagement activities to enable that ongoing discussion, effective behaviour campaigns and marketing and a step towards demystifying bus travel. So, in conclusion then, at this pivotal moment for the bus industry, undeniably we have a unique opportunity to change, to build back better, and in the words of Michael Marmot, to build back fairer, and to create the foundation of communities that we want to live in. In planning for this new normal, though, let's not rely on the old approaches. Let's not retrench into old habits and silos and plan in isolation for the AM peak and the point-to-point commute. Let's be curious about what our residents want and what would make the transport system really work for them. Let's understand different perspectives and different needs and work in partnership to make a system which truly works for our complex and diverse community.
Thank you very much for that Is it okay if we move on to Patrick Warner's presentation? We'll come back to some questions. So, hi, Patrick.
Hi, Tom.
Brighton and Hove buses. You're also involved in Metrobus. This is your second presentation today, is it?
It is indeed.
Busy man. Well, yeah. Without further ado, if you can take over, please, Patrick.
No problem. Thank you very much. I think Justin very kindly is on standby to set my slides going due to a technical fault I had earlier on. So thanks, Justin, and thanks, Tom. I'm going to make an apology at the start because in the new work from home era that we're all in, I'm afraid the reality is I've got a sleeping Labrador not too far from my desk that sounds like a pneumatic drill. So if you hear a snore, I've not dropped off on you, but she's probably going great guns. So apologies for that. Really pleased to be able to join you here today, and really wanted to, in this session, talk about how our very challenging vision for how you get a regional fleet of 400 buses to move towards zero emission has actually opened the floodgates for us to really enhance our partnerships across the region and deliver so much more than just clean bus journeys. So on that cue, we've gone straight into the next slide. Thanks, Justin. And collaboration and innovation, as I say on this slide, are absolutely key, as is partnership, which has been a reoccurring theme throughout the day-to-day. And for us, our zero emission mission starts with our nearly 20-year-old Fastway bus rapid transit scheme in Crawley and Gatwick. And we're just putting the finishing touches now to Europe's largest deployment of these really clever buses, with a fleet of 54 buses that we hope will hit the streets of Crawley and Gatwick and into Surrey within the next year. And that's going to transform air quality in the communities that we serve. It's also going to transform the passenger experience, giving them quick, quiet and clean journeys. But it's really captivated the imagination of so many other stakeholders in the vision, and has enabled us to position the bus as quite a powerful enabling factor for far wider decarbonisation than just buses, and also start to unlock the benefits of a real heavy pipeline of investment in infrastructure to support buses and those passengers. Something that we're now up to almost £42 million worth of a pipeline of £42 million worth of funding for new zero emission buses and that infrastructure. So really exciting. I'll move into the next slide if I can. What I would say before I start getting into some of that more exciting stuff is that zero emission buses on their own are not the answer. I'm a huge advocate of hydrogen, as many of you may know. But if all we do is stick buses that cost twice the price into the same congested roads that we have today, we'll squander the benefits that they could be bringing. So this picture, which I love showing, is the A259 between Peacehaven and Brighton. It's in the morning peak, heavily congested, as you can see, but it's a real success story of what bus priority can do if you do it right and get it in the right places. And in the morning peak prior to the pandemic, and we hope very much after the pandemic as well, nearly 50% of the people travelling into Brighton in the morning peak are on just 3% of the vehicles, and that's been enabled by this fantastic stretch of bus lane. And we've kept adding buses. I think there's normally about 27 buses an hour at that time of the day, allowing people much faster journeys by bus into Brighton. So we want to see more of that. And it's really, really important across the country because we know that we've seen a decade of damage to bus journey times. They've got 40% longer. And whilst we know that transport emissions are the biggest contributor to climate damage and poor air quality, it might surprise you to know that only 4% of roadside emissions come from our current. Let's do the really exciting hydrogen technology and drive a wider decarbonisation, but let's please make sure that these buses are able to trigger the kind of modal shift and behaviour change that we need to really clean up our communities. And if I go into the next slide, please. So I spoke a little bit about how buses could enable the wider decarbonisation of local fleets, and I really believe very passionately that that's the case. Our second deployment, which may very well come to the Brighton and Hove area at New Haven Depot in the future, we're working hard on the funding details for that at the moment. But if we're successful there, this will enable 2 councils' fleets worth of dust carts to switch to hydrogen power at the same time. And when I speak about buses being a powerful enabling force, hydrogen is not a new technology. It's been around for 40 years. The reason it's not mainstream is because it's been incredibly expensive and very hard to scale. But as I said at the start of the presentation, buses and our regional fleet of around 400 buses bring that scale to make it a reality. And councils with a much smaller fleet of vehicles would never normally be able to afford to take that leap. But by working with us, we can provide them with shared refuelling equipment, and not just for them, but potentially for logistics fleets, supermarket delivery vehicles, ambulances, gritters, and possibly even taxis in the future. So huge potential for sharing that infrastructure, really reducing the cost of entry for many smaller fleets, but also driving down the fuel prices for us all, which is really key, I think, in this sector. As I'll touch on later on with some of the regeneration funding, providing new opportunities for jobs and skills as well in this really exciting energy sector. So if I can go on to the next slide, please. So I spoke about regeneration, and actually hydrogen, as I mentioned, has excited people across the region. It's also given us a voice that we wouldn't normally have. And so regularly I'm finding that we're in partnership meetings with groups across the region, where we're the only bus operator in the room regularly. And that's given us unique access. It's also enabled us to be agile and quick thinking and see how we can contribute even more to the discussions that are going on. And Crawley Growth Programme, which was one of the local enterprise partnership funded regeneration schemes a few years ago, was the first opportunity for us to really sort of punch way above our weight and involve ourselves in a totally new space. This is a project that was designed to revamp quite a tired 1950s new town, providing 3,000 new homes in the town centre, 7,000 new jobs, lots of new employment space, public realm improvements across the town, and a really high quality improvement to public transport, because they needed match funding. And the match funding we provided was actually investments in low emission diesel fleet that we were buying anyway. But by enabling them to use that as match funding, they were able to draw more money down from government for wider regeneration. And that enabled us to become a key partner in this regeneration project and influence a number of other transport improvements. So as part of that programme, we've replaced every single real-time screen in Crawley and Gatwick with brand new latest generation colour screens that don't just display your next buses, they also include 24-hour scrolling news and weather information as well. They've added 75 new bus stops with that equipment that never had any information at before, apart from traditional timetable cases. There's money for what I call super hubs, or what the region has called super hubs. And this was really taking a look at the on-street infrastructure, waiting infrastructure. We've seen a huge sort of revolution in railway infrastructure and stations becoming almost retail destinations in their own right. But actually on the bus side, bus shelters across the country quite often aren't even fit to keep you dry, which is the most basic purpose of them. And so what I was very keen for us to try and do was look at that, tip it on its head, and see whether there was a much better passenger experience we could help engineer that matches the sort of comforts they have when they're travelling with us on the bus, like free Wi-Fi, USB charging, seating, and better security with CCTV and lighting. And our stakeholders in the Crawley area really jumped on this programme with us. And so there's £300,000 in there to create a super hub concept. And we found some of the employers in the Manor Royal area really liked this as well, and are looking at adjusting land around the boundary of bus stops to sort of create pocket parks, placing the bus waiting area at the centre of their community, potentially with adult play equipment and areas for people to sit outside at lunchtime and eat their lunch as well. So really seeing those transport interchange points becoming part of the place as well as how you get to and from work. Exciting stuff there. Part of the public realm improvements in the town centre have led to re-looking at the current bus station, which is a collection of sort of metal shelters railings down the middle, which are quite prohibitive with brambles, and we've said this really isn't fitting for 21st century transport interchange, where people travel between bus, train, and the retail facilities. So the Crawley Growth Programme does away with the surface there and creates the basis for a new state-of-the-art transport facility, which follows on a little bit later in my presentation. And also some money for the development of a mobility as a service app, which sadly had to pause at the start of the pandemic. And excitingly, a Manor Royal bus lane, which is going to take minutes off the journey times through one of the busiest business parts in the country and make a big difference. So go on to the next slide, please. This one is the New Haven Town Deal Fund initiative, which is in with government at the moment. It was submitted earlier in the new year. And it's really, really exciting. It places buses and hydrogen infrastructure at the centre of the regeneration of this deprived coastal town, and will provide, if we're successful in the bid, refuelling infrastructure for up to 50 buses, our whole New Haven depot contingent of fleet, and up to 50 dust carts, as I was saying, from the 2 local councils in the area. It could also fund a brand new state-of-the-art commercial body paint and trim facility, which would, half of it would be given over to a new collaboration with East Sussex College Group to enable the training of commercial paint, body and trim students in the future, but crucially acting as a platform to be able to train the engineers of the future in the new hydrogen clean energy technology as well, which we're really excited about. Super hubs again starting to catch on across the region. Some new super hubs will be funded for the town centre in New Haven, and also looking at some bus priority improvements along the coastal corridor with East Sussex County Council. So lots more bang for the buck there with that scheme, along with a whole host of other non-transport related initiatives. And then on to the next slide, please. It's nearly the last one, you'd be pleased to know for timekeeping purposes. This is the Crawley Town Deal Fund initiative, and I was really, really pleased with this because the seeds that we sowed with the work on the Crawley Growth Programme led actually to our stakeholders becoming as ambitious for bus as we are, and completely voluntarily without us reminding them. The Crawley Town Deal Fund application, which is also with government at the moment, includes a brand new state-of-the-art bus station building, which the growth programme workers will have done the groundwork for by preparing new public realm space, and then £4.5 million will come from the Town Deal Fund application if we're successful to build a brand new state-of-the-art bus station there. And these things are really going to transform passenger experience, which I'm really pleased about. Buses actually make up far more of the public transport journeys in Crawley than even the railway station. So it's really fitting that as the town gets a refurbished railway station, that bus passengers shouldn't be left behind and should get a very deserving fitting facility as well. And then I can go on to the final slide. Thank you. One of the things I would say is that whatever we do, and there's some really exciting technology and really clever new fuels in the mix with a lot of the work we're doing, we should never lose sight of people and the communities that we serve. I've been really fortunate to get out on the road occasionally myself during the pandemic and roll my sleeves up and get out alongside our frontline colleagues and drive a bus. And they've done a fantastic job. So it was really great to hear Hugh paying tribute to transport workers earlier on in his short speech. But we've gone further than even sort of helping people get and do those essential journeys. Earlier in the pandemic, Hugh might remember actually, I emailed him and a number of other politicians to offer our services for mobile COVID testing facilities, and sadly we were never able to get that idea off the ground. But very recently, in the last few weeks, we've managed to repurpose now 2 fastway buses in Crawley to become mobile vaccination stations. So we're in partnership with our healthcare provider partners, Alliance for Better Care, going out and reaching some of the most vulnerable members of our community who can get their COVID vaccines and be safe for the future by enabling those vaccinations to take place on a bus. we're now in a conversation about a third one, and even the two at the moment are getting 300 jabs a day into the arms of the people who need them most. So fantastic to be able to play a part in not only our sort of traditional role as a transport provider and enabler of some of the future exciting technologies, but also great to be able to do our bit and help out during this really challenging time. And with that, I'll say thank you very much for listening to me rabbiting on, and I'll look forward to taking part in the question and answer session afterwards.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Patrick. I think we'll get stuck into some of those questions, and I was going to selfishly, as chair, kick off with my own. Paul, just going back to your presentation at the start, and I did lead into this. You know, £500 million. I'm working on some Transforming Cities Fund programs in England at the moment. Quite big sums attached with those. And it's actually very difficult to get the mechanisms in place, the processes in place. When you look at it, it turns out to be quite a lot of money per month at the height of your construction. So we're just wondering if that is a significant challenge and if you're built ready to deliver that kind of investment across the piece.
Well, it is a challenge, and I think local authorities are already looking at how do we even afford the work that goes into constructing a bid, rather than even thinking about putting breaking the ground or anything like that. It's about constructing a good bid, and I know the money is back funded. So this year, for example, there is 35 million of the 500 million in the budget, and that will slowly increase as the 5 years goes on. But it is a challenge. But I think at last count, we're seeing 7 partnerships forming around Scotland, beginning discussions on that, or creating bids and engaging with Transport Scotland to see what exactly can be included and what are the limits of the definition of infrastructure. So that work's happening, but as you say, it is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be easy if you've got huge bridge structures or a single piece of infrastructure that's hundreds of millions. But with bus infrastructure, and it's a good thing, you have to deliver lots of little interventions, potentially through lots of different districts with lots of different partners involved to deliver really meaningful benefit. But you're not going to get a single piece of bus infrastructure that costs as much as a fourth crossing, or something similar. No, that's really good. Just going to go to the chat to get a few questions here. So a question for Hugh. Do we have any idea yet whether the £3 billion from early 2020 will be ring-fenced for its original purpose, or will it be eaten up by COVID support? That's from Stephen Hosking.
So Stephen, hopefully you heard me touch on this, because that was one of the items I flagged as a concern. So, as things stand, the indications are still that money will be used that which it was first unveiled. But I'm just being realistic with the Treasury's position. If you look, for example, at the rollout of gigabit broadband, was promised £5 spending review gave £2 billion. But of course, the government target and commitment remains the same to deliver it. And so what we're seeing across the piece, and actually Network Rail saw about £1 billion shaved off its budget as well, albeit arguably that was because it wasn't able to do the work during that period of time of lockdown. So I don't want to prejudge the report and recommendations that we make as a committee, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if we don't that £3 billion will be ring fenced for that which it was originally designed to. If the Prime Minister was serious about to invest in buses and really put them at the forefront of transport policy, then that needs to remain the case. And then the COVID rebuild needs to be separate.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much for that. And I suppose we will find out more in the coming weeks. Of course. What the financial outlook looks like.
Yeah, we've got the budget to come through as well. So, and we had spending review just for 1 year because everything is on a very short-term basis. But what I can say to you all is that, I used to work inside the Treasury a bit for Philip Hammond, and I work very closely with Rishi Sunak, the current Chancellor, who's also has always been sort of close friend of mine. And I know that he's absolutely committed and really supportive of the Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps, one thing I say about Grant, and my job is to actually scrutinise and sometimes be critical. So I'm not saying this because I'm his best mate. He really does try and stick up for the industry. One of the challenges, Tom, is that right at the heart of government, there is a sort of tension between those that perhaps are a little more cautious and want to lock down. So Secretary of State for Health, understandably, it's his fault if health conditions worsen. But ultimately, the likes of Grant and Rishi are there at the table to make sure that the economy continues to deliver and people can get back to their jobs and their normal way of life, and industry is supported, because ultimately their reputations suffer if that doesn't occur. So I'm always keen to whisper into their ears what they need to do more of.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Hugh. And I've got a question. I might come to you in a minute. We've got a couple more to work through. Pam, there was a question from Sarah around what types of infrastructure, and you said combination of infrastructure and dynamic signals priority. What do you see the split being? Where you're getting the bulk of the benefit, do you think? Is some projects it's massive investment in signals and that proves really effective, and then in others, the signals aren't going to cut it. Could you give us a bit more on what that balance is?
I would say it's probably more infrastructure as opposed to signals. But I think the important point of the kind of CERT program is the fact that it's infrastructure, but combined with complementary policies and the investment by the bus operators. It's all three working in concert. And I think it was Patrick yourself who mentioned this kind of idea of the end-to-end bus priority. And I think that's what we've tried to really go for. The fact that that cumulative benefit you get from making enhancements across a particular route. And so, yeah, majority probably infrastructure rather than signals, but definitely a combination of that alongside the other investment that's being made.
There was somebody, maybe even a colleague of mine, shouting now saying signals are infrastructure, but we you know what I meant.
Yeah, all right.
I've got a question here from a panelist to another panelist. Angela, you had a question for Patrick?
Thank you, Patrick. I love that photo of Brighton and Hove with the bus lane, and the issue is the congested traffic that you've still got running alongside it. What more can we do to? We've got the priority. We're trying to make it more attractive. You're talking about the super hubs, which I'm interested in as well. How do we nudge? How do we get those drivers into those buses? And that's always the challenge, isn't it? It's the $1 million question.
Great question. I think more of that for sure. That's done a great job, and it's shown how we can shift people and give them a better alternative. And we're not saying we don't want you to have the aspiration to own your own car or have that level of independence. We're just saying look at the journeys that you make and which ones would be better done in a sustainable way. And certainly the commute in areas like Brighton and Crawley is an obvious win for that. We've seen double-digit growth every year on that coastal corridor since that bus lane was introduced. But when you come off the ends of it, both in sort of the Brighton seafront area and then again on the way through to Newhaven and Eastbourne, you're back into the same traffic. So as I mentioned earlier on this morning, ambition for end-to-end priority is what's going to really slash that journey time, overturn the decade of damage, and give people a choice. That's what we want. I think most people aren't as hung up about using a bus as some people fear. Actually, they just want to know what works for them. And so if we can really provide a fantastic alternative, it's convenience that will win every time.
Thanks for that, Patrick. I'm going to stick with you. You've got a couple of questions more on this super hub concept. And, is there more information on this? Will there be more information? People want more.
Definitely will. And
you've already had 2 presentations today, so I'm not going to give you a third. But
no, we want more. We're hungry for more for our passengers and more, because we know that will make the bus journeys more attractive and keep sort of driving that modal shift. And actually, what we've found is that the traditional shelter suppliers that many councils have contracts with are really not interested in this space at all. If you speak to the likes of Clear Channel, they just want to know how they can reinvent the same stuff over and again. So it's not easy. It really isn't easy, and we're virtually having to threaten to take away their opportunities to advertise in sort of prime locations, to get them to take the concept seriously. So other than the artist impression that I showed you in my presentation, we don't have anything more yet, but I hope we will do in the next few months. And I think actually it's an opportunity for local authorities to challenge the funding model too, because we know that unless these shelters are in areas of really high footfall for advertising, actually they're quite often really forgotten about in the outlying areas. And this is an opportunity to challenge the funding model for that as well, because some locations might be big enough to take a Costa franchise or a local independent sort of coffee franchise on there. How great would it be to grab a fresh cup of coffee as you board your bus and have a more enjoyable journey that way? So really want to shake up the established practice with waiting environments and raise the bar.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. I think when you think of waiting environments, when you go to an airport, you don't just see it as a travel experience, do you? People, maybe not myself, but some people want to go early. They want to be there. There's an attraction to it, an experience. And yeah, I'm not saying a bus super hub even is going to be quite the same as a Heathrow terminal, but there is that sense of destination there. I'm just looking back through the questions now. We've got another here for Hugh. I'm going to read it as it is. Keith Homer, bus service operators grant is essentially still fuel duty rebate with a tweak to cover electric buses. Is it time to look at fundamental reform to incentivise patronage growth in place of burning fuel?
Well, thanks, Keith, because you've now allowed me to plug another select committee inquiry that we've just launched, which is on how we get to the electric charging infrastructure for 2030. So the government, again, has unveiled an ambitious target of the end of the combustion engine sale by 2030, but we don't know actually how we're going to give the infrastructure to consumers to be able to operate electric vehicles. But with that comes the £40 billion shortfall to Treasury that fuel duty and vehicle excise duty deliver. So we are doing our inquiry both on how we get to 2030, but also how we replace the existing form of tax with we'll be looking at road pricing. We're quite interested in this concept whereby an app should be able to tell you how congested your roads are. So we'll give you a better price to go and use it right now. How do we make sure we don't give people free, the first 1,000 miles, because then that will actually take away from active travel. And the reason I mention that, Keith, is because you've just thrown in a really vital component for our inquiry, which is obviously, if the concept of fuel duty goes, then so does the bus service operators grant. So actually there's a good opportunity to put that into the mixer as well. So yes, I agree it does need to change. It's a bizarre concept when you consider the direction of travel. But a bit of a plug for one of the other inquiries we're about to look at. Can I also just throw in Tom as well, because it's great that Patrick's here. I think one of the things I also meant to mention is that I really hope with the buses strategy that the government starts to fund and ring fence money into all transport authorities. So we've got a real bus champion inside local authorities. So Pam speaks really well, and I don't want to single out any part, but let's look at Patrick and Brighton, for example. Brighton, and it's not my party, they've really partnered up well with Patrick. So the two bodies, private and the local government, have really delivered a superb service, despite the fact that you've got the C, which is the obvious conundrum of getting round in a circle, and the lack of the bus centre and the park and ride, which Patrick and I have talked about, due to the South Downs being a bit of a problem. Whereas actually you could take another county, and I don't want to pick on East Sussex, but I live here, so why not, where perhaps more of the concern is on social care and some of the real big issues. So maybe the transport service just doesn't get to the top of the priority list of that county council. So I would like to see real champions for bus inside every local transport authority provided by government, because you can do all these things, but if you haven't got the people inside local government to really have that passion and excitement that Pam, Andrew and others do, then actually it just won't happen, and the operators are then partnering with somebody that doesn't really have it as part of their main key component of their job. So I just thought I'd throw that one in, even though you didn't ask me, Tom.
No, that's fine. As a panelist, you're welcome to throw things in. Is that sort of a Chris Boardman for buses? Is it that type of champion?
It is. And actually, Chris is a great example because we've worked with him in Manchester, and the great thing about Chris is that he also comes up with concepts so let's have a mini crossing. Well, why is it that the Department for Transport won't allow mini crossings just because they're not 100% safe when they're 90% safe? And so people like that actually come up with the ideas, but also the push. And as a national body, it's much better than individual, really good practice areas. If everyone is pushing these proposals, then that's where change happens. So yeah, Chris Boardman type, active travel champion, but a bus champion is what we need in every transport authority.
Yeah, and talking of change, if the last 12 months has taught us anything, it's that we can deliver massive change when we want to, more than we ever thought we ever could in peacetime. And therefore, these things, decarbonisation, what seemed impossible is not. It's not impossible if we can do what we've done in the last 12 months as a nation. I'm conscious of time. So what I am going to bring this session to a close. I'm sure we could have carried on with more and more questions. So I want to thank the panelists there with our final session for adding some real value there. And I wish you great success with what you're doing, and let people like me know how we can help share information and support you as we can, because to be honest, it's like a hobby as well as a job for a lot of people involved in transport. They really want to see success and these projects delivered. So yes, thank you very much for that. I did have a few closing thoughts on the day as a whole. I was asked by Landor to bring them in. It's been a wide-ranging discussion within the bus space, and a lot of different people doing fantastic things. I think what I've seen as some common themes is there's the partnership thing, and I know that sounds cliche, but actually you can't deliver these things on your own. We need politicians, and we need the private sector, we need the public sector, we need consultants as a plug. And we all need to be working in the same direction if we're going to achieve the success that we want, if that is to decarbonise transport or to make it back more accessible, or all those things. And touching on the climate, that we have been on what I often call on presentations. It's a long road to the climate emergency being declared, decades and decades. But now we're seeing more development in that space in terms of policy and announcements every month than what we did in decades some time ago. And I really would employ all the organisations to bring the climate emergency to the front and centre of the work that they're doing, and see it as a fantastic opportunity that, yes, we want to deliver improved access, we want to create jobs, but I really see the country really coming around the idea of the green recovery coming off the back of coronavirus. And then also with COP26, apologies if I'm wrong there, I think it's COP26 coming up next year. There's going to be a huge amount of media interest, and with that comes a lot of education, and we need to bring people alongside with us. And I really personally, seeing that as a theme throughout today, really employ everybody to think carefully about how are we linking what we're doing with the plan to address the climate emergency, the climate crisis, and to decarbonise moving forwards, and bring in all the stakeholders that, for whatever reason, come into that discussion off the back of that. I want to thank Landor. I touched on it at the beginning. Landor are a good example of a business that have had to completely transform what they're doing over the last 12 months, probably more so than any business that I work with. I'm still providing services, transport services, just doing it from home. Landor, we're delivering primarily conferences in person, and they've transformed everything that they've done. And they've, I've got a great deal of respect for the individuals personally and keeping their head held high. So well done to them and the people who've worked very hard. Thanks to the sponsors that have made it happen. And then all the speakers, not just the ones that we've just had, for playing their part to help share this information and make people think, feel good about it, that they're not alone here, that we are all trying to do something, and that there are other people built around you to support you. So thank you very much. I suppose this is where I would do a mic drop and walk out the room, but I'm gonna say good luck, have a nice weekend, stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you very much.